Thanks for tuning in to Hardstone Media, where we use our superpower of hindsight to look at TV series and movies and see how they could have been improved.
Today we're presenting part 1 of an original fan fiction story inspired by the Warcraft universe. This story is set before the First War, but doesn't strictly stick to the lore established in the games and other media. That said, it is strongly influenced by them, and we hope you enjoy. Anduin Lothar, known to friends as Andy, wakes up with a startle, sweating and panting loudly. His wife Tarja comforts him, and he tells her that he's had another nightmare. At their bedroom door, his young son Callan appears. Andy comforts him and tucks him back into bed, telling him everything's okay. The next day, Andy is building his new farm. However, he is running out of supplies, and his family are running low on money. Andy goes into the house and lifts up a rug to reveal a false floor. He lifts up the floorboards to reveal some hidden bags. He opens a small one and only finds a few golden coins left. Later that day, Andy meets with his neighbour, who is also struggling to finish off his farm. Andy offers to take him to town to pick up some supplies and offers him help with building his farm. Callan asks if he can come to town as well. Andy checks and confirms that he's done all his chores and agrees. As they leave, Tarja discusses with Andy their money problems, but he assures her he'll work it out. Andy, Callan and their neighbour travel by car, passing newly constructed farms and a new barracks. Andy asks the workers about the new barracks. They explain to him that the increases in attacks from bandits throughout the area has meant that the king is sending reinforcements. As they enter Sunnyglade, a mob of villagers are arranging in the main square, ready to go hunt the bandits down themselves. One asks Andy to join. If he does, there will be money involved. It'll help him complete his farm. Andy's neighbour agrees, as he is low on money as well. Andy, however, refuses and tells him that he's a pacifist and doesn't want to get involved. The man warns him that he may not have a choice if these bandits aren't stopped. As Andy picks up his supplies, there is a commotion as one of the mob begins yelling at Andy, calling him a coward, but Andy doesn't respond. The man then attacks him. Andy tries to avoid his attacks, and the attacker is surprised at how well Andy defends himself. This surprise then turns to anger as he attacks again and again. This time Andy moves out the way and the attacker clatters into Callan. Rage fills Andy's face. His eyes turn cold and he stares at the man with violent intent and approaches his attacker. But then Callan cries out and humanity returns to his eyes. He then runs over to comfort his son. The rest of the crowd take away the attacker and ridicule him for hurting the boy. Andy asks Callan if he's alright. He replies that he's fine, but asks why his father didn't fight back and didn't protect him. Andy feels shame, then explains that once he was a warrior, but fighting just creates pain, sorrow and hurt. As they travel back through the forest via the timber yard, Callan asks more about the fighting that he used to do. Andy reluctantly explains that he grew up in the capital of Stormwind. There he became a knight and fought in the Wars of Unification, but quit when he met Callan's mother. Callan's eyes beam with excitement. As they arrive home, Andy takes the only remaining gold coins he has, puts them in his bag under the floorboards. The next week, Andy is finishing up the barn, but again he has run out of supplies. He speaks with his wife Tarja, and they discuss that they need more money. He decides to go into town and find what work is available, taking the last remaining gold coins. As Andy gets ready to head into Sunnyglade, Callan again asks to come along, but Andy checks and sees that he hasn't finished his chores. He's been spending all his time pretending to be a knight. Andy tells him that he shouldn't waste his time dreaming of war and fighting, that he has responsibilities here on the farm. Callan protests that he just wants to be a great knight like his father. Callan continues pleading with Andy, but he refuses. When Andy arrives back in Sunnyglade, he finds that there is a crowd discussing the attacks throughout the area, that farms have been attacked and people are fleeing Sunnyglade and heading to Stormwind for safety. Andy looks at the horizon, back towards his farm, and he sees smoke. Panic overwhelms him as he rides back as fast as he can, passing burning farmsteads as he goes. When he finally reaches home, he finds his farm on fire. He frantically searches through the rubble for any sign of his family, but there's nothing. Distraught, he rides off into the countryside, searching for them, but all he finds is more destruction. Eventually, exhausted, he arrives back in Sunnyglade, and goes to the local tavern and drinks himself stupid with the last of his money. He gets kicked out of the tavern and is found by a dwarf. The dwarf helps him up and takes him to his campsite, taking care of him, introducing himself as Bran Bronzebeard. The next morning, a group of soldiers led by a knight, Sir Gavinrad, enter Sunnyglade, sent by the king to stop the raiders. The soldiers stop off for a drink at the Shears Tavern. Bran and Andy, who are eating lunch, overhear the group's mission, and Andy asks to join their expedition. Gavinrad laughs that they don't need some help from a drunk homeless man and a dwarf. Bran asks where they're going. Which bridge are they taking? Gavinrad is confused and tells the dwarf that they will send scouts out to survey the area. Bran smiles and calls over the local barmaid, Sally. He asks her for something, giving her some gold coins. Sally returns with a map of the area. Bran shows Gavinrad the map and insists that they join Gavinrad if they want to find what they're looking for. Gavinrad reluctantly agrees. The group head out on their journey and approach a bridge being guarded by 2 trolls. The trolls tell them that they need to pay the toll if they want to pass. Gavinrad refuses to pay. He will not deal with such creatures, and pushes the trolls aside, marching towards the bridge. Then from the surrounding trees, trolls emerge, throwing tomahawks and spears at the soldiers, who use their shields to defend themselves. Andy, who doesn't have any weapons, tries to avoid the battle, ducking and weaving the projectiles. One of the trolls breaks through their defences and runs straight for Andy. Andy backs away as it attacks, but just before he's struck down, Andy's instincts kick in. He disarms the troll and takes his tomahawk. Then, seeing an opportunity, he runs around behind the trolls, beating his way to the troll's leader and takes him hostage with a tomahawk to his throat. The rest of the trolls stop fighting. Andy tells them that they'll pay the toll, they just want passage, and they just want to find who's been attacking their villages. On hearing this, the trolls begin to laugh, and the troll leader orders his men to let the soldiers through. Andy tells Gavinrad to give him the money, but the troll laughs and smugly refuses their money, telling him he hopes they find what they're looking for. The group travel through the Elwyn forest. As they do, Andy hears something in the distance and tells everyone to stop. Gavinrad dismisses him, but then after travelling a few more steps, he also hears it and orders the soldiers to quietly approach the sound. They reach a ridge and peer over it and see a pack of humanoid hyena creatures called gnolls. Gavinrad sighs with relief. Just some gnolls, nothing to concern with. Andy, however, reminds him that the gnolls once nearly defeated Stormwind in the old times. Gavinrad dismisses this as an old wives' tale. Group travel around the pack. One of the soldiers, however, keeps joking about the creatures and throws a rock in their direction. The gnolls, who aren't fighting between themselves, suddenly stop and follow the sound, finding the group unawares. The gnolls descend over a ridge and attack. The soldiers defend well, but there are too many. The soldier who threw the rock is dragged away by the gnolls. Andy then takes one of the soldier's swords and attacks the gnolls, forcing them back and helps rescue the soldier. Bran then pulls a small ball-shaped object with a fuse poking out of it. He lights a fuse and throws it at the gnolls. It explodes and sends dirt and debris flying everywhere. The gnolls flee in panic, allowing the group to escape. Andy asks Bran, "What kind of magic is that?" Bran laughs. "It's just a little thing we use in mining, called a bomb." The group continue travelling as they follow the map to where the bandits' camp should be. They can see smoke rising from the area and realise that they've found them. They sneak up towards the camp. They set up a formation, ready to raid the camp. Bran and Andy are ordered to stay behind. On Gavinrad's signal, they charge in, weapons drawn, yelling battle cries. But once they swarm through the camp, there's no one there. No one alive, at least. They find the dead bodies of the bandits throughout the camp. Some are strung up on the fences like a scarecrow. Others have been mutilated, and many tents and buildings destroyed and set alight. The soldiers are horrified. Bran and Andy join the group and are just as horrified. Andy freezes when he sees the destruction and death, but then comes to and frantically searches for his family, but there are no traces of them. The group begins searching through the campsite and find lots of valuables, including those from the local abbey at Northshire. It looks like someone destroyed them, but wasn't interested in the things they'd stolen. "This is very strange," Gavinrad remarks. Andy asks, what are they going to do now? They need to keep looking. Gavinrad, however, refuses. His mission was to stop the bandits, and the bandits are stopped. Andy is incensed. What about the missing people? What about the farmers and the villagers? Bran tries to reason with Gavinrad, explaining that they need to rescue these hostages, but Gavinrad refuses. He tells them that they'll set up a camp near the dead mines for the night, then they're heading home. Bran and Andy agree to stay the night with them, but that they'll continue their journey the next day. Sitting around the campfire, the soldiers chatted to themselves about Andy, whispering to each other, where did he learn to fight like that? Gavinrad is annoyed and orders them to stop the chattering. Then, one of the footmen works up the courage to ask, where did you learn to fight so well? Gavinrad again orders them to stop. Then, after the soldiers share some looks of disappointment between them, and Gavinrad feels the glare of the soldiers focusing in on him, he answers the question for Andy. He learned to fight within the walls of Stormwind Castle. You see, this man who's joined us is none other than Sir Anduin Lothar, the Lion of Stormwind, the last of the Arathi, and whatever other names they gave you. The soldiers become ecstatic that such a legendary warrior is in their midst. They begin asking questions, but Andy tells them that the lion is gone and he's just a simple farmer now. Gavinrad, however, cuts through the excited murmurs as he continues his speech. Oh, that's right. There's another name they gave you. Coward, Betrayer, the Knight with no honour. We can't forget about those names, can we? Bran tells Gavinrad to pull back his insults as Andy lowers his head. Gavinrad, however, refuses and tells the group that he didn't recognise him at first, just thought he was another drunkard. But then after seeing him fight, he realised that this is the famous Lion of Stormwind, the man who left his soldiers mid-battle in their final victory to reunify all the lands of Stormwind, that only his lieutenants saved them from defeat that day, and ever since then, he's had no honour. Gavinrad looks down at Andy. He explains that on that day, he was a common soldier, like these men here. Anduin looks back at him with sorrow. If you were there, then you should know why I stopped fighting. Gavinrad shakes his head. Doesn't matter what happened. War is war, and you owe your allegiance to the king, and to your fellow soldiers who needed you. Anduin looks back at him tearfully. I'm truly sorry for that day. I failed everyone, but I'm no longer that man. I'm just a simple farmer who wants to find his family. Gavinrad won't listen anymore and storms off. Andy follows him and asks, why are you so angry? Gavinrad recalls in that battle he lost his little brother, that he'd still be alive if it wasn't for Andy. Andy apologises again and explains that during the battle he was so engulfed with bloodlust that he ended up killing a young boy, and when that happened he couldn't go on anymore. That's why he stopped fighting and won't ever fight again. Andy finishes up stating, I don't want to fight anymore, I just want my family. Gavinrad then fronts up to him, looks him square in the eye. If you want your family back, you will need to fight. You'll need to reawaken the lion. During the night, as the group sleeps, they are woken to a commotion as a group of giant grotesque humanoid monsters, twice the size of a man, attacks the group, kidnapping them and dragging them into the dead mines. Andy awakens in a cave. He looks around and sees the rest of the group all tied up. He sees that there's one extra person in the group, his neighbour who joined the first expedition to find the raiders. Andy tries to speak to his neighbour, but he has been badly beaten. He asks many questions about his family, about the rest of the men who disappeared, about these creatures. The man replies, with what little strength he has, that these creatures aren't the raiders, that he and a few others were the only ones that survived the massacre, but were captured fleeing back to Stormwind. Gavinrad asks, what happened to the bandits' camp, and who's been raiding the villages? He replies, not who, what. He tells them many human hostages have been taken to the village in the Swamps of Sorrow, not on any map, and it isn't a human camp or a troll tribe. It's something more evil, filled with wicked creatures, and before he can finish, he's cut off as one of the large monsters bursts into the cave, a single horn protruding from his forehead above his single eye, yelling at the captives in an abrasive language that the group has never heard. As the monster yells and his attention is directed away, Andy deftly removes a blade from the monster's belt and hides it beneath him. just avoiding the monster's gaze as his head and single eye swings back in Andy's direction. The monster grabs the neighbour by the legs and drags him out. The group hear the man screams, and then silence. Andy cuts off his bindings and frees the rest of the group. Andy tells the group to get ready to flee. They creep out silently, scanning the end of the tunnel for any movement. As they exit the tunnel into a larger cavern, they hear clashes of metal and monstrous roars. The group moves quickly and quietly, finding a pile of items including weapons, bags and gear. They take what they can, when suddenly a monster bursts out of one of the tunnels. Blood over his face, he spots the group and charges at them. Andy pulls out the monster's blade and stabs him in his one eye. The monster flays about in pain and anger, swinging his large club at the humans, but they avoid his reckless attacks and follow Gavinrad down a tunnel, heading away from the noises and battle. They come to a fork in the road. Andy insists they go left, as there is a breeze and that must be the way out. Bran and the soldiers agree with him, but Gavinrad becomes annoyed at their loyalty towards Andy and insists they take the other tunnel. Andy and Bran plead with Gavinrad and the soldiers to follow them, but Gavinrad refuses angrily and orders the soldiers to follow him. Andy and Bran begin leaving down their path when Andy stops. "We need to help them," he tells Bran, who disagrees and tells them that they need to escape and find his family. Andy replies that they will, but he won't fail these soldiers like he did all those years ago. Bran agrees and they follow down the other path. Once they catch up, they find that the soldiers are under attack from a mysterious slime-like substance that moves as though it has a mind of its own. Tentacles reach out and attach themselves to the soldiers, trying to pull them down into holes in the walls. The soldiers hack away the tentacles that reach out towards them, with Gavinrad leading the attack, saving his fellow soldiers. Bran and Andy join the attack, pulling the soldiers one by one to safety until only Gavinrad remains. But in his heroic defense of the footman under his control, Gavinrad is now being engulfed with tentacles, pulling him down into the largest hole of them all. Andy leaps forward, hacking tentacles as he reaches out for Gavinrad's hand, but Gavinrad, knowing his fate, simply shakes his head and utters, "Get them all home safely." With that, Gavinrad finally surrenders and is pulled away from Andy's view. The soldiers lay on the ground exhausted. They all look to Andy for answers. He looks around at them, unsure of what to say. Then they hear the sound of battle, of creatures with weapons and evil intent approaching. "Quick, follow me," he orders, and the weary soldiers do so. They race through the cave's twisting tunnels. As they do, they hear a loud roar, a war cry from some unholy creature. The group follow Andy up the path where they find an exit out onto the side of the mountain, but Bran falls behind. Closely behind them, the sounds of their pursuers get louder and louder. The last soldier emerges from the cave entrance, and they wait, weapons drawn, ready for what will emerge. Then there's a loud explosion, then another, as the tunnel entrance collapses. Just as it does, Bran dives through the entrance, narrowly avoiding the collapsing rocks. The group are amazed that he escaped. Bran smiles and gives off a deep hearty laugh. He shows them his little ball-shaped weapons, bombs, which he used previously against the gnolls. He tells them they're normally used for mining and excavation in the great hills of Khazmodan, but they also come in handy if you don't want to be followed out of a cave. The group move away from the mines and set up a makeshift camp overseeing the swamps of sorrow. The next morning, the group discuss their options. Many are ready to quit. Andy tells them that they're all free to go back, and he's not their commander. That he's going to rescue the hostages, including his family, and they're all welcome to join him. Bran is the first to announce that he'll follow Andy. Then, one by one, the rest of the soldiers agree. Andy stares over the swamps of sorrow, focused on the smoke rising from a far-off village. He points to it and tells the group that's where they're heading. Thanks for watching. Part 2 should be launched soon if it's not already linked at the top of the screen. Let us know your thoughts in the comments and we'll see you later.